Hello and welcome to our weekly podcast. I'm Jules Hilliard, founder and CEO of Secure Block Technologies, bringing you the industry's first blockchain operations center, or BOC for short, monitoring analytics and security and validation for all of your chains and nodes and dApps from one single pane of glass. From developers to enterprise companies tapping into the many benefits of blockchain, our BOC will optimize your DevOps cycle, or Dev Chain Ops as we call it, and expedite your next-gen chains and dApps into production. For more information, please visit our website at secureblockTech.com. On today's podcast, we need to jump right in and address the cybersecurity attack happening right now. Right here in the good old US of A, perhaps the greatest breach and threat that we have faced in modern history. Although the experts are digging in on this all-hands-on-deck breach, we are going to tell you what we know so far, what the damage could be, what the response might look like, and of course, how blockchain and AI could help in future attacks. Cybersecurity is the battlefield of the future, so let's go to our war room now. Coming back for another round with us, we are excited to welcome Mr. Big Bad Bill McGraw. For those of you that weren't with us last time, Bill is the managing partner of E2D Capital, actively driving one of his premier portfolio companies, FactorChain. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Jules. Good to be back and see you guys again.
Absolutely. We've got some great stuff to talk about today. And when there's cyber war, SBT brings our own pack of cyber war dogs to the fight. Joining us, our mean old pack dog with the intelligence that most would consider artificial, our CAIO, Mr. John Hooks. Welcome back, John.
My pleasure, Jules.
And our in-house lead cyber special forces CISO, Mr. Joel Semengan. We were very excited to get your take on this topic today. Welcome, my friend Joel.
Thanks, Jules. Glad to be here, and happy holidays to everyone.
Absolutely. Happy holidays. Let's see what we can do to help keep it happy. You know, we're going to kick this off, and we're going to change it up a little bit today and go a little more fireside chat. We have a lot to talk about, a lot of intelligent people on this call. I'm going to kick it off by talking a little bit about, we've talked about it in the past, the importance of DevOps, which evolved, as we all know, to DevSecOps. And then, of course, as we've named in blockchain, DevChainOps. And I feel that as we dig in generally on exactly what happened, then I think we should probably take a further look into the importance of DevOps through the entire cycle. Joel is our resident cybersecurity specialist. How about you lead us off?
Oh, thank you, Jules. So I like the fact that we're talking about this thing right now. Obviously, this is my bread and butter, and I've been doing this for multiple decades. And it's just wanted to share some information that most of you, unless you're not following or looking on the internet, it's very hard to miss. So I've seen so many reports right now. Currently, specifically what caught my eye, there was a report that shows that the United States is currently number one on the top 20 most or worst affected countries by data theft, with over 1.8 million reported cases. So according to the report, that's about 4 times as much as the number 2 on the list, which is South Korea, next to Canada, the UK, and Australia, taking 3rd, 4th, and 5th place. And the recent report that cyber firm, well-known cyber firm, FireEye, was reported to have been breached by what's reported to be nation-state hackers, which resulted in the compromise of its software tools that basically is used to test the defenses of their customers, which is obviously a big deal. I mean, this is something that you can just brush off. And according to the FBI, that they indicate an actor with a high level of sophistication that is consistent with nation state. Hence, this is really a high profile case. And it's important to note also, as I read the report, that according to what they've identified, that they weren't even clear when the breach actually took place. Well, for me as a cyber guy, this is a very huge problem that I have seen over and over again from various breach reports that I've seen. Varonis reported that it takes almost 200 days before an organization detects a breach. This has actually gone down from what I've seen in the past, where it used to be like 300 plus days or more, which is basically translates to over a year before an organization can even identify that they have been breached. And then I saw another report, a separate report that IBM reports that the organizations usually take about almost 70 days to contain a breach. Again, that seems a long time just from the detection plus the containment of the breach. And then we have the most recent report, and it's still actually in the news right now, with the targeted cyber attacks via SolarWinds, which basically impacted several U.S. federal agencies, some of which says DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, DOJ, the Treasury Department, Department of Energy, and so on, and even some other non-government or private organizations. And most recently, I saw a report that Microsoft actually reported that they were impacted as well. Now, though these investigations are still ongoing, it was reported that hackers were able to gain access through Trojanized updates to using the SolarWinds Orion software. And then there was also another report that the SolarWinds exposed their FTP credentials in public GitHub repo, where a cybersecurity researcher tweeted that and basically hinted to us that this compromise could even date back in 2019, way before the reported U.S. federal attacks. Again, I could probably go on for hours to share with you more and more about this really heightened and escalating cyber attacks that's happening not just in the U.S., but across the globe. And this will be a good talking point for this session. You guys have any input to share, John or Bill, regarding what I just mentioned? Feel free to chime in.
I'll take it. So, at the risk of being trite or basic or boiling things down to a very low level, this is not an artificial attack, no pun intended. These advanced persistent threats have been around for a long time, and they're very sophisticated, as you mentioned, Joel. And there is a significant amount of money, effort, and time put forth. We don't have all the facts yet. But I'm going to go on record as saying that in my experience working in high-speed networking, network monitoring, deep probing of networks as part of the Wall Street community, financial services organizations, this is something that is very difficult to prevent. Even with the sophistication of AI and machine learning tools to model and threat models that you can come up with in all different scenarios, it's more about the tactics that are used in these attacks versus the techniques. Because Joel, again, as you know, if you want to get a password from a particular organization, there's several ways of doing it, right? So if you focus on a tactic, that is, you try to prevent someone from getting your passwords, then you separate out, maybe time misspent applying AI and ML models to trying to figure out which passwords have been attacked to more finding out, okay, what's the potential, what's my attack surface, and what tactics should I be, preventing, right? So that's my first point. My second point is, we really don't know to the extent to which this type of attack has collateralized. We know that in a supply chain breach such as this, as you mentioned, they go into the kernel of the system, or in this case, one of the files, the DLL files that spun out the upgrade for the SolarWinds product, and by masquerading as a valid party that could do this with all the right certificates that were, signed off by the right people, it was downloaded perhaps automatically, and that's going to be one of my points in the near future is that, a lot of these automatic upgrades that don't have human intervention or human in the loops are going to become problematic. So you're going to see a lot of these upgraded, systems that have continuous delivery, SecOps continuous delivery, or on-demand delivery, maybe have a second look, right? So could blockchain have helped? Well, theoretically, if the code that was maliciously planted into the dev cycle of SolarWinds had some sort of provenance. In other words, it would be fairly apparent if you had a tool like our Overwatch Blockchain Operations Center that said, hey, look, something's in your system that has no official provenance. It's an outlier, right? And so an AI program could have detected that and said, look, you're going to start building a product based on information or code or what be it that doesn't have any business in your system. So blockchain could have helped in that regard if that code had been detected because it didn't have a proper timestamp as part of a blockchain, right? So, I'll turn the mic over to someone else, but you can't remove the human in the loop part of this by just assuming that AI and blockchain are going to solve the problem. It's not. In fact, hats off to the FireEye engineer who obviously detected this anomaly and then, sort of through some transparency decided to make sure that everyone in the world knew, where it came from or what it was doing to the world in general. So that's my take on it.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. And I just have one question. Where was that FireEye engineer when I was just taken down by my mute button earlier? When Joel handed it off to me, I could have used in the day. All right, great. Bill, we were talking a little bit about this earlier as well. You want to jump in here and talk a little bit about your thoughts on the attacks and perhaps blockchain and AI?
Absolutely. So where my first thoughts take me is into the as we're moving into this new paradigm from decentralized systems. So if we're moving from the centralized part into the decentralized, and by its nature, we're talking about consortia. We're talking about more interoperability between partners, more sharing, more transactions. I mean, that's really fundamentally what we're doing with the blockchain system. So what it really starts to say to me is we can't ignore the various layers that are enabling that. So if we start looking at things like identity. So like what John had said, you've got someone here who is not credible, or there's something happened in my system. Well, that's the reactive part of it. But to John's other point, you want to narrow that target, if you will. And so if you need to be very cognizant of not just your own firewall inside your firewall and protecting, but now I'm reaching out, or I'm in a consortia, or I'm interacting with others. Who are those others? And so as we talked about on the last podcast I was on with talking more about factor chain, that is a supply chain finance application. So you're talking now. You've opened up. Okay, I need some access to some data. The idea typically is that the more data, the better. And then you'd say, well, I get diminishing returns. But in actual fact, you need to start thinking about this data as being a liability, because do I really need that data, or do I just need the results of a computation on that data. So, I mean, there's a number of things that need to be thought through here. And then, as we kind of move towards putting these things in place and monitoring them, we're using the AI for risk assessment. And we've got that data allowed there. Well, now we're saying, well, I want to be able to track this. So now I'm going to say, well, I've got to pull in, what's happening along the supply chain. Well, we do a lot of things with cold chain. So there's keeping the temperature right in a truck. There's an IoT device that's going to measure that temperature and feed it in so that our AI can pay attention. Well, what is that device? Where did that device come from? What rights does that device have? Again, that whole identity, governance, and then the ability to, as John was saying, to be able to use the AI to look for some of those anomalies. But you've got to have that infrastructure in place, and you've got to have if you want to really take advantage of these new technologies, there's a number of things more to do than simply a distributed ledger. So these systems bring with them some opportunities for more breaches, but that means you've got to be even more aware and put the infrastructure and the DevOps and all of the things that you guys provide. It has to be in place.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you for that information, Bill. And I think that kind of rolls us into where I'd like to take this conversation. And, now once you realize you've been attacked, you realize you have this type of situation on your hands, you've got to go into damage control, damage assessment. You've got to start to analyze exactly what, when, where, and how. And before you can even create your plan of attack on combating the attack itself, one of the things that in our system, for example, the immutability, by being built on blockchain for blockchain, if in fact an attack happened, we would be able to go into the logs and see exactly who went where, when, and start to trace those attacks forward and backwards. Joel, this is really your wheelhouse. Why don't you talk to us about what do you feel the next steps are? How do they assess the damage, and where do we go from here?
Thanks, Jules. So, I mean, first we got to go to deal with the basics, and not just because we're talking about this disruptive, great technology with blockchain, and then moving on to the more advanced. But my advice and my take on this is just that we as organizations and security practitioners should continue that basic path of maintaining the security controls that you have for your organization. So, keeping your data safe online, using your VPN to strengthen remote connections, maintain your AV software, implement strong password policies and best practices, patch and update your software regularly, specifically security patches, implement two-factor authentication, endpoint protection, secure your mobile and smart devices, building a robust infrastructure with layered protection. You should be very familiar with the defense in depth framework, and make sure that you also implement the network segregation and so on from an infrastructure perspective. And it's also important to establish an ongoing cybersecurity training across your organizations, from the highest person in your organization to everyone at the operational and business aspect of your organization. And lastly, this is one of my big takes, is that any organization can probably have high or unlimited funds, which I don't think there's quite a few of those organizations out there that can implement the latest and greatest security technologies. But for my take, it's very important to continue, for an organization to continue and enhance your organization's incident response program, because most organizations kind of have a reactive incident response organization as opposed to really having a robust and proactive one. So what I mean by that is you should be able to establish good policies, roles, and responsibilities for all your IR teams, and the stakeholders, and perform tabletop exercises, do periodic mock drills, and so on. Because I think it's important that, as mentioned earlier in the session, that since the numbers seem to be decreasing on the time to identify as to when an organization has been breached. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it used to be in the 300 plus days. Now it's down to 200 days, which is still a long time. That the moment that you identify that there's a breach, you want to make sure that you diminish or limit that time as short as possible to execute your incident response as quickly as possible so you can perform your typical IR response program. And that's pretty much my take for now. And anyone else want to chime in?
Hey, John, actually, we were talking about this a little earlier when it comes to damage assessment. And, you've been in IT for a long time and data security for even longer. I think you were there when the first tablet was stolen from the Greek library way back in the day. And I was wondering if perhaps maybe you wanted to give us a real world example of, what do? You just got hacked, you find out you're hacked, and how do you assess the damage?
Yes, well, let me tell you that, one thing I want to get across to all the CIOs, CISOs, CAIOs out there, and anyone that has anything to do with network operations, that it's very important that there be teamwork. For example, I can't tell you how many times I've seen people set up a SolarWinds network monitoring or network management system and say, okay, that's great. I'm going to give it admin level access. Password's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. You've heard of those stories, right? That's because 9 times out of 10, what I see is when the network's involved, security is never called in to kind of, monitor it from the get-go. And that includes the concept of developing a product from the ground up with security built in up front. So that's the first lesson that I've learned, and I would tell folks on this podcast, get your team together and make sure you understand from top to bottom where the potential vulnerabilities are. Second of all, don't assume because you are not one of SolarWinds' 300,000 plus customers or the 18,000 that they estimate have actually been affected by the breach that you're in the clear. To paraphrase George Carlin, the famous comedian, it's a club and you're not part of it. Well, we don't know. We still don't know, based on the facts at this date and time, how many people were affected that could have been non-SolarFlare customers. Case in point, I have many clients that have called over the past couple of days and said, well, John, everything we do is SaaS or in the cloud, so we're not affected. We're not Cloudflare, SolarFlare customers, right? But that's not the case. Remember, cloud and SaaS are just your stuff on someone else's computer, right?
Yeah.
At some point, that other person's computer is being managed by network operations and hopefully security operations. So if they failed at some point to take the necessary steps to prevent these kinds of attacks, then it doesn't matter if you've got a cloud connection or it's in your data center, you're still going to have the effect. And that's what I think is starting to freak people out right now, because we really don't know how extensive this breach went beyond. Second of all, everyone's focusing on the fact that there is a particular type of breach implied in this particular attack, but these are very sophisticated folks. We have no idea what they started recalibrating once they got the message that they've been figured out, right? So they could have months ago started laying out other types of attacks using similar techniques that we don't even know about. It's sort of like Donald Rumsfeld's thing, we should only fear the unknowable, right? So that's the advice I would give to folks is go back to basic blocking and tackling. Make sure your teams are coordinated on security side, the network side, the application delivery side, the mobile side, and also just make sure that you aren't complacent by thinking it didn't happen to me, because it could very easily happen to you, especially in a cloud environment.
Yeah, you made some very, very great points. A week ago, nobody was hacked. And, as of right now, only the top companies with this fantastic engineering team were even able to discover that they were hacked. And where there's smoke, there's fire. John, so you brought up a great point. For those of you that think you might be out of the scope of this hack, it is time to dig in and to do a full security assessment and take a good hard look at your network and your different pieces of technology to ensure that you are in fact safe. And then Bill, you as well, you have a lot of experience as well. How in your experience do you assess the damage or the proper way to jump in right now if you think you are out of the danger? What do you do to ensure that you are in fact not breached as well?
Well, I think you've got to go back to what John was saying and also Joel, which is the preparation is part of it's how do you find. You don't wait till you get attacked. So, and now that you're thinking, okay, I dodged a bullet. Well, did you dodge a bullet? Okay, well, no, you can't be sure that you did. So now you're going to say, well, how do I find that out? And I'm going to go on and depending on the size of the organization, I mean, this is massive. This could be massive. And if you're looking at multiple systems, multiple users, I mean, where do you start? So, I mean, I have to echo. I don't think there's a there's a silver bullet. Oh, I'll just go do X now that I'll check. You would love it to be like that, but to Joel's point about these, having the desktop exercise that you go through, or having are there some white hat potential processes that you go through with external groups that are ongoing testing your systems? I mean, there's a number of things that you can do, and I just don't think it's one of these things, and I hate to come back to the COVID thing, but you look at that and you say we weren't prepared, it happened, and nobody could have done anything about it. Well, in fact, we were talking about it in 2012. We were talking about those potential pandemics a long time ago, and we saw a few, that it would happen somewhere else, Hong Kong or something like that. So we don't have to really worry about it. This is an attitude, I think, of you have precious resources and you need to keep them secure. But this now goes up into the C-suite and into the if you're a public company, now you're looking at liability where. And this was my one of the points I was making before was around data. Like you don't just have to go, did I get connected? Did I get attacked? But you've got to go, where are there resources that somebody might want? And you go, okay, my data. Okay, but which data? Like, are you collecting user data and then are you archiving it? And then where is that user data kept? And that sort of thing. Like I think you've really now, this is a wake-up call. This is like, you don't know what's going on. You don't really know how this happened. Like what I saw from an outsider's perspective was the security folks at the U.S. government kind of using I can't talk about it because it's confidential and security. But I think because they didn't know, and I don't think they had, and I don't think they know what to do. And then you look at these old systems. Like I think this is this is really something that has to be addressed, but I think it has to be addressed in the context of there are other systems that we have been talking about for the last few years, these distributed systems, these identity systems that are built on blockchain using AI to monitor, and we've really got to start looking at them and not be in this, well, what do I really need blockchain for? man, there's a lot of stuff that if you're just taking this general approach, there's a lot of stuff that you're missing, and you've got to go level by level, layer by layer of your apps and your systems and start, swapping stuff out, or at least planning for the inevitability of these systems are going to get breached. I've got to go in and I've got to be vigilant. So I don't think I answered your question about what do you do first, but because I don't think there is something, right? Like even if the best companies don't know, now what do I do? I was ready. You weren't ready. Obviously you weren't ready. And there's going to be things we're not ready for, but it's that, again, going back to there's these systems, there's things in place that you can do, particularly in areas where I think there's some high visibility areas that are obvious. And to me, it typically is all around the data. That's where people are going to want to get in. They want to get your data, and that's where the breaches and start there.
Absolutely, Bill. And to your point, we all plan on, and we know our fire escape route. But when you wake up in the middle of the night and your roof's on fire, all of a sudden the plan goes out the window. Right. And right now we are, not to be the warmonger over here, because I'm not, but we've been told cyber warfare is the war battleground of the future. We are here. It has been happening kind of in a controlled fashion. And you're not putting this genie back in the bottle. It's war, and it's cyber war. And as John was saying in our pre-podcast here, great expression. We've heard it a million times, ambulance chasing. Now there's going to be a ton of ambulance chasing. Everyone's all hands on deck. And Joel, and I know, from our long time knowing each other, you've dealt with some pretty significant, situations before successfully. What kind of response expectations, can we expect? What can we expect from here?
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, again, having been in this field for a long time, and then, as you mentioned, you and I go back about 20 years ago, that it's imperative that the response and ambulance chasing, must be really done in a good manner, or else the organization is just spinning its wheels, kind of like what I think Bill was alluding to. So, and that's as I mentioned earlier, that a robust incident response is really critical. And of course, on the flip side, not from the non-operational side, to answer your question, Jules, that most organizations are covered or bound by some type of regulatory requirements, right? So if you're just like in my background, I was mostly in the fintech, in the private sector. We were governed by FFIEC, and one organization by the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, for various requirements, regulatory requirements, OTS and such. And, there's protections that we have to comply with regards to PII, and in some organizations, health information, EPHI and such, and even additional information that is pertinent, like intellectual property that your organization, would need to secure. So that what most of the time is what drives the importance of the commitment of an organization with regards to their ability to respond, because they are liable based on the regulatory requirements that they need to comply with, and again, also from the high demand from their customers to make sure that their personal data, private data, PII, is basically secured and protected from end to end, either in data in use and also in transit, and also data at rest. And hopefully that answered my question, Jules.
Well, Jules, I think, is having some technical difficulty. So I've got a question for Bill while he's wheelhouse. Bill, put your VC hat on for a second. And at the risk of sounding like an ambulance chaser, what do you see is the opportunity for companies like SBT and Factor Chain, et cetera, to go now to VCs, private equity firms, investment sources, and say, look, we're aware of this situation. We're building the monitoring tools that we need, to to take advantage of not only traditional networking operations but also adding the additional AI and blockchain component, so that, while we can't necessarily prevent these types of attacks, we can go a lot further, as you said earlier, on identifying up front what the attack surface is within the organization and also the threat level.
I think it's a great perspective to have. And, initially what will happen is, companies will be, with the ambulance chasing, they'll be like, well, I'm going to highlight that part of it. I think, again, going forward, from an investor perspective, and from what we talk about is investment ready companies. So, you're on a trajectory from a startup where you got a good idea, then I do an MVP, I do my V1, and then I move towards a commercialized system. Well, in those early stages, typically you're looking at a slice of functionality that will impress the investor to be able to say, okay, I believe in the vision, or I believe in the idea. I think what's going to happen, and this is what, we see this when we're talking to potential bringing in investors for our portfolio companies, and then we're asking that to companies that are coming to us and looking for financing, is that what are you doing around cybersecurity? How can you go into, particularly in the enterprise? If it's a business to consumer, it's funny because people don't really, it's in the cloud, it's that's one of the riskiest parts. So and then when you look at it I've got an application that's going to be more B2B. Now I'm going to have to not just integrate to the technology stack of these other companies. Now I'm going to have to also worry about, as you said, just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean I'm safe. So, and then we see this this ongoing trend, particularly in fintech, as you brought up, Joel, is you're starting to look at payments. You're starting to look at the movement of money and the movement of value. And so how am I protecting all of that? Then we look at these embedded systems. So you're probably aware of Stripe Treasury as one example that was made a couple of weeks ago. So now we've got these fintech companies that are embedding their tech into someone else's tech. So you can imagine the flow from, so Stripe is in Shopify. Now I'm a user of a Shopify website, and I'm using that banking that is embedded in Shopify, going back through to Stripe and going to Goldman Sachs to my bank account that got set up. Well, if that doesn't open up a number of very meaty places where breaches could come in, I mean, those are the kind of things. And then so the opportunity to not just wave your hands and go, I've got a security solution, but to really go, how am I going to implement my system so that it doesn't broach the security that's already there? I think that's really where the focus has to be. So any startups that are out there, anyone that's looking at raising money, this is really something that either you need to look at, or if you've got it, you can highlight as SBT. I think it's going to be something that people are going to be, look, where can I invest? Because this is not just a blip. This is something that is, as Jules said, we're at war, and the war is not going to end. It's just going to continue.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Bill, that I really think, especially from what I mentioned earlier too, that besides the fact that organizations should just go ahead and continue to maintain and strengthen their general security controls that are in place, it's important for organizations to start planning and moving forward to implementing advanced technologies, again, to the point of what we're talking about here, is to strengthen their cybersecurity program using enterprise blockchain technology, and even adding AI and ML to it. And I'm going to speak real quick at a high level just to make sure that we're all on the same page on what the added value does blockchain really provide from a security perspective. Because we all know that blockchain records are immutable. Once the records are validated and recorded on the chain, they're basically unalterable. You can't change it. And since the embedded metadata are tied to the transaction, it cannot be separated, can be lost or altered, which is a good thing. The user integrity is verified with asymmetric cryptography via digital signatures and transactions, which are also added onto the blockchain. And there's full transparency of transactions, which are visible and auditable to all the trusted users who are on the same blockchain network.
Right.
Again, that's an added security plus.
Right.
And then the smart contracts provide secure automatic transaction execution, which enforces on the terms of the contract. And there's also increased security regarding identity management. We talked about it earlier prior to this call, that that's important because the ID validation, for example, in the healthcare environment is key because a lot of people's identity is either stolen or impersonated, and it's a big deal, especially at the healthcare and other industries as well. And on the flip side too, counterfeiting prevention is a strong feature that blockchain will be able to address. The non-corruptible database records that validates each unique product through the chain. So as organizations deal from a supply chain perspective, that can be validated, and it eliminates a duplication, and it ensures the authenticity, right? And then lastly, leveraging the distributed keyless signature infrastructure for the authenticating devices and the user's system security augmentation will be beneficial, for example, in the smart grid environment. So hope that kind of takes us back to what John and Bill just mentioned.
Absolutely, and I'm back as well. I believe the next thing we need to put together is a blockchain phone. Just trying to host this topic, I've been kicked off 3 times. So I think we're hacked. I think we're being watched. We're watching the watchers watch the watchers. So no, absolutely, guys. I want to come back to this. We're trying to keep these brief for the audience. It's clear that there are going to be a lot of updates that are happening here over the next few weeks. There's a lot to be learned. I think we can dig in and even go deeper, especially as more information becomes readily available. If it's okay with you, gentlemen, I'd like to wrap it. I think the audience has a lot of great information to research. Again, thank you for joining us. Make sure you check out our website at secureblocktech.com as we continue to explore how blockchain and AI are affecting the future of cybersecurity. And we're going to work our way through possibly the greatest use case in our lifetime. So, gentlemen, Bill, thank you for joining us again.
Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. John, I'm glad you're still. Absolutely. And John, glad you're still with us, buddy. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. And Bill, a pleasure seeing you again. Thanks for coming on. Joel, always a pleasure.
Absolutely, Joel. So glad you could make it. Love the Santa hat. When we get back into town, we'll be coming over for some gifts and some coffee. Of course, and for the audience, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you again next week. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Merry Christmas.